producer of the most successful film franchise in Hollywood history, David Heyman. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you very much. You're very generous, but I don't view myself in any way as the creator. That's Joe Rowan, without question. Maybe the creator of we talked about this before, creator of an environment that allowed the film to be made and putting together the people to do it. But without question, the creator is Joe.
So, you're kind of at a salutary moment. It's the last film in the franchise, the most successful franchise in the history of film. Talk about, there must be maybe a sense of nostalgia, right? The film's in the can. You're looking forward, you're looking back. What's this moment like for you emotionally?
It's a little weird, to be honest. Over the course of 12 years of production, we became a family. A lot of the same people, a lot of the same cast, a lot of the same people worked on the films from beginning to end. And after 12 years, everybody's going their separate ways. So in some ways, there's a sadness, because it was a very intense and incredibly fun experience. Also to work on something like Harry Potter, which afforded us so many opportunities that we would not have on other films, and independence that really is unique when making big studio films. I know I'm never going to have that again. That being said, at the same time, I'm really excited to have the time and the opportunity, to embrace new challenges, new projects, work with different people. But there'll be nothing like Potter. So there's a bit of a sadness, and it's definitely was a special decade plus. But it's exciting, new challenges and change is always good.
Did you expect to be here? I mean, in this kind of moment, with this kind of film?
Not a clue. I mean, when I first read Harry Potter, it was in 1997, which was before the book was published. A very bright lady in my office. I moved back to London in 1996 to find films with a deal with Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers were paying for my office in exchange for a first look or whatever I came up with. And I'm a voracious reader. I love to read. And so I decided to make books the foundation of what I did. It was also a good way of working with a studio that was 6,000 miles away to have something concrete like a book to show them. And it also was a way for me, who had not lived in England for many years, to work with some of the writers and talent that I might not have otherwise had access to. So, books. And Tanya Sagachin, this incredibly smart lady, read an article in Bookseller magazine, which is, as many of you probably know, is a trade publication in the UK. And she got the book in, and she called up the agent, got the book in, and in my office we have 3 shelves: priority, medium priority, and low priority. And this book, there was a little blurb in Bookseller, but it wasn't much, but this book sat on our bottom shelf, low priority. And a few weeks later, my secretary, every Friday we take home material and then discuss it on a Monday. And my secretary at the time was fed up with reading all the rubbish, which is what she normally read, and she knew this book was meant to be good. And it was in, at the time, Galley's form. She took it home and then came in to the office on the Monday, and I asked her, anybody read anything good? And she said, yeah, I read this book. What's it about? What's it called? She said, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I said, that's a terrible title. What's it about? And she said, it's about a young boy who goes to wizard school. I said, that's a good idea. And I took it home, and I fell in love. I read it in one evening, and I was obsessed. But I had no idea what would become of it. I thought if I was lucky, it might be sort of a modestly sized British film. I most certainly have no idea that 14 years later we'll be sitting here talking, having made 8 films. And we talked about this, it's easy to write history looking backwards, and I can see how that happened, but most certainly at the time, I pursued it because I loved it. That was the only reason. I really had no idea that it would be as commercially successful as it has been.
Let's talk about this lightning in the bottle concept. After we see a film and we've seen a certain face portray a character, an actor, there's a symbiosis that occurs and one becomes the other. It's impossible to separate them. Talk about assembling this team, this lightning in the bottle concept. I think people are fascinated how these projects come together, especially after 8 films and now these faces are burned in memory as these characters. Talk about the concept of the director, the filmmaker, the casting. If you can just, how did you assemble this world?
The first, if you have a book, really, I think the first key hire is the screenwriter, because with the Potter books, Joe's voice really, looms large, and for all its magic and all its, wondrous adventure, the key to me, the reason why I loved Harry Potter were the characters. I really loved these characters. And so in choosing a screenwriter, there was someone called Steve Clovis, who had written and directed a film called The Fabulous Baker Boys, and then wrote the adaptation of Michael Chabon's book, The Wonder Boys. Nothing could be further from Harry Potter, but he was a great writer of characters, and he was a great adapter. He was able to capture the author's voice. So Steve was the first person who was hired. And he began writing in 1998, before the book was published in the US. And it took him quite a while to deliver the first draft, but he was a sort of key part of making the films whole. Then the director. And the hiring of the director, you need a good director to make a good film. You need a good script and you need a good director. Those are really backbones. Of course, you need a good cast too, and you need all the other elements. But the director really is the center, and makes it whole, and gives it a point of view. And there was a lot of discussion. There were several directors in the mix. And Joe Rowling, for example, I remember, had a real interest in Terry Gilliam, who would have made a very different first film. But the studio had a more conservative approach, and they, once it became clear that Terry was just not an option, we settled on Chris Columbus, who was a very conservative choice, but really was the most passionate person of all the directors for the book, even to the extent of he was a writer himself, of having written his own draft, which we didn't use, but really helped Steve Clovis in terms of providing the notes. So those are the keys. And then it was the production designer. And on Harry Potter, Stuart Craig was our designer. We wanted a sort of classical aesthetic. And he was pivotal, and he really created the Hogwarts of film. He designed it from top to bottom. So those were really the key elements. And when it came to casting, it was really hard. We got a lot of submissions, but finding Harry Potter in particular was impossible. We were around 8 weeks before shooting Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and we knew we had people to play Ron, Hermione and Snape, etc. But we didn't have our Harry, and that was a little bit of a concern. And what happened is I went to the theatre with Steve to unwind, and walked into the theatre, and sitting in the row behind me was this boy. And by that point, I'd been walking around London a bit like a dirty old man looking at young boys. We were very nervous parents as I was checking out these young boys, and just desperate to find Harry. But in the theatre, Dan was, this boy was sitting behind, and throughout the play, I paid no attention to the play, but to this boy with big blue eyes, this old soul in a young body. And during at the end of the play, actually, in intermission, I was walking out, I was still looking at this boy, when somebody shouted out, "Man, David!" And somebody I knew, and it was, as it turned out, Dan Radcliffe's father. And long story short, we ended up bringing Dan out and putting together a group of people. We tried different combinations of Harry's, Ron's, and Hermione's, and the right chemistry was Dan, Rupert, and Emma, and those were Harry, Ron, Hermione. And then you just put together the team. But I think the key, and one of the things I think I was most proud of, is creating an atmosphere in which there was no ego. You know, one of the great things about working with children is they'll keep you honest. And again, with working with children, you've got to create an atmosphere that's safe. Well, for working with in any creative enterprise, I think safety is integral. But particularly around children, you wanted to have an atmosphere that was fun, and you know, Chris Columbus was wonderful, you know, at that. I think throughout the 8 films, there was always an atmosphere. It was work, it was serious, but let's have a lot of fun. And it was an environment that was supportive, so that people felt safe, and that if they didn't do it right, that was okay. There was a support mechanism there to allow people to do their best work.
You know, it's easy to say, to talk about the godfather of a film, or a mentor, or a protector. I think that there's a lot of misconception about what a producer is, what a producer does. You know, even sometimes I, as a screenwriter, I'm not always sure myself. Sometimes a producer is your partner. Sometimes, you know, in a kind of tough love way, a producer can pose as enemy to drive you.
Sometimes a producer is the boyfriend of the, or the girlfriend of the. The producer is the most over, you know, there's so many producers on a film, you just see these endless list of people. Just like you see endless, actually, you see endless production companies, because when you're not making a Hollywood film, when you're making a film in Europe, you have to piece it all together with countless different financing sources. You know, each country providing a different amount of money. But with regard to the and sometimes producers are part of that. But in Hollywood in particular, the producer can be, as I say, can be the manager, can be the person who read the project initially, but then had nothing more. It can be the person who manages who's sort of the line producer who manages the budget. There are so many different roles. For myself, on Harry Potter, or on the films that I work on, Harry Potter, I read the book, I persuaded the author and agent to allow me to produce it, and helped facilitate Warner's negotiating the rights. Was involved in the discussions of hiring a director, and then ultimately made the choices of the directors once Alfonso Cuarón and beyond. Involved in the script. It was very much for Joe, the protector of the material. It was the person who knew it. You know, I knew it incredibly well, and was determined to preserve the books. And was involved in all the key creative decisions, design work, designs, casting, all the way through to editing, visual effects, and then making sure that the marketing and distribution were in the spirit of the marketing in particular was in the spirit of what we had created. With Harry Potter there's a lot more. There's also the theme park and all the ancillaries. And so again, very involved with that to try and make sure that there was a sort of continuity of message, continuity of the work that we started, that Joe started, and then we adapted in the films.
I think also, you know, producers have such an imprint on the work, as much really as the writer and the director in many ways. And there's such a personality to your body of work, a kind of humanity to it, that I think you brought to certainly the Potter series, but I also, one of my favorite films that we discussed is Day Trippers, which is a little independent movie that has, its personality is really sort of positive outlook on life, and a lack of self-importance, and a sense of humor. I'm wondering, do you, when you're attracted to material, when you see material, sometimes I feel like writers tell the same story over and over again. Different characters, different guys, different geography, different time period, but they're attracted to the same impulse, same kind of characters. Do you, as a producer, feel, are you drawn to the same kind of material? Do you bring the same kind of humanity to and outlook to your movies?
I hope. I mean, I'm most certainly drawn to human tales, whether it be The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, The Day Trippers, even a film that I produced called Yes Man, which was based on a book by Danny Wallace, which was about the possibilities of life. It was about a character who said yes to everything. And it was, I loved the idea of someone who was very shut down, having been forced into a position where he had to be open to everything that came his way, and had to say yes to everything that came his way. You know, I think you know, it's the film business it is a business, and so there is an aspect of commerciality that inevitably enters a discussion. But ultimately, I think one's got to be careful not to retrofit. For me, the key to any story, if someone asks, what do you want? I don't know. I want something that moves me. That's all that matters. It can make me laugh, it can make me cry, it can piss me off, it can make me angry, it can make me sad. I want to be moved. Generally, I like stories that are about people, but are more than about people, that have a mythic quality. I'm drawn to stories about outsiders in some way. But the key to me is to be moved. We all, I'd love to make more commercial films, but I'm also very happy making a film like The Day Trippers, which cost $60,000 and did well within that context. It's certainly not something you'd put in 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 cinemas, but the budget was the appropriate budget for that side. That's the business side of it. The key for me is to find stories that I connect with, because if I find stories I connect with, then I can contribute. If I am working purely with my head as opposed to my heart, I don't think I can contribute as well. So, for example, even on Potter, I related to Harry. I'd been to a school like Hogwarts, alas without the magic. I had teachers who I liked, teachers who I didn't like. I had friends, friends who I was close to and then fell out with. That whole notion of never judging a book by its cover, that notion that nobody is quite as they seem, I find very interesting. A lot of the characters in Harry Potter inhabit a grey area. Harry's got his demons. Dumbledore is a heroic character, but he has his demons. And I think Snape we think is a bad person, and yet we find out is in a way one of the most heroic characters in the series. And I think that exploration of that grey area is something that's very interesting to me. But ultimately the key to Harry Potter was I loved it. It moved me. It reminded me of those books I read as a child. Whether it be Grimm's fairy tales, but also Roald Dahl. It made me laugh. It moved me, and I connected with characters. And for me, it's a roundabout way of saying, I guess, the films I would make are films that I have connected with in some way or other. And I suppose in that sense, there is a continuity.
Tell us the sort of genesis story of you as a producer. Your parents were producers. It was in your lexicon, in the DNA of your childhood as you were growing up. It was around the house. You went to Harvard. You studied art history?
Yeah, history and art history.
Yeah. And how does that all feed into a river that leads you to producing?
I always loved film. And when I left university, after I left university, I traveled for 9 months around, Greece, Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, India, and ended up back in New York, which is where my father lived, and started to work with him, which was great, but he turned down things, he would turn down the things, I never got anything going with him. So then someone called Lisa Henson, who I'd been at college with, at university with, called me up and said, Lucy Fisher, who was an executive at Warner Brothers, for whom she worked, I've been promoted, and there's a place there, would you be interested? I said, yeah. So I met Lucy, and the next thing is I moved out to Los Angeles to work as a very, very junior creative executive, writing notes and reading countless scripts. In fact, I had the first 2 projects I had to do notes on. One was Police Academy 5, and the other was Goodfellas. And I'll never forget, I did these notes on Goodfellas. I was given the script, it was Martin Scorsese, and he said, will you do the notes? And I was not briefed, I just had to do the notes. So I did the notes, and I handed them in to the executive, and he looked at them and said, these are really good, but you've missed out the key thing. How can we introduce Henry Hill in a more sympathetic way? Now, if you remember, I don't know if you remember, at the beginning of that film, there is a character in the boot of a car, trunk of a car, and Henry Hill goes in and just stabs him repeatedly. And they wanted to introduce, or the executive wanted to introduce that character in a more sympathetic way, and confess at the time I didn't say what I meant, what I should have said, which is Martin Scorsese's films aren't about inherently sympathetic people. They're about characters who are unsympathetic, but over the course of a film, you come to understand why they have become as they become. And ultimately, it's Martin Scorsese, so he did what he wanted, and the studio said yes, but that's most often not the case.
Since the beginning of your career, the film business has changed a lot. There's a contraction, there are fewer films being made. There's more pressure to bear on making money, maybe more than art. You and I spoke about the line between the business and art. Talk about what you've seen in terms of, and we're here at this conference which is about multimedia, the internet, the relationship between books and journalism and film. How, first of all, is it overblown to say that there's been a big change in the film business? You've been inside this enormously, I mean, so you're inside a juggernaut, so you're coming into contact on a daily basis with marketing, talent, maybe more marketing than anything else at this point. Where has it been? Where are we? And where do you think it's going?
A couple of things. One, studios are making fewer films and bigger films. So what's happened in America most certainly is there's that middle space is going, which I think is very sad. At the same time, you know, Europe is, and the rest of the world is becoming more and more important. The US, when 15 years ago, was I think 60–65% of the box office. Now it's 35% of the box office. So I think that's very exciting, and I think there's real opportunities to make other stories. And there are whole new audiences emerging. China and India, very powerful audiences. So I'm a big believer in stories that are not just about America, but are about have a universality and can cross borders. The business is contracting in many ways. Video, you know, when you see a film in the theatre, very often that's a loss leader. In other words, the cost of making a film and marketing a film does not get reimbursed by the theatrical release. A studio in general receives between around 45% of the box office. So if a film makes $100 million, they're seeing $45 million. Often there's, between the marketing costs and the actual cost of production, very rarely is that returned through through theatrical. The importance of the ancillary is vital. You know, one can't overemphasize that. So DVD is, you know, hugely important, and yet that has decreased by 50, 60, 70%. It's terrible. I think we need to look at alternative ways to monetize. One of the reasons why the studios are putting in so much money into 3D is because it's a new format. They can charge more. At the moment, it's harder to illegally, you know, download, illegally copy those films, and that's very appealing. You know, illegal downloads is a big, big problem. You know, the danger is we go the same way as the music industry. That's a real concern. So I don't have the answers, but I do think that you know, there are many positives. And one of those positives is you can now make a film much more easily than you could before, and much less expensively. It's much easier to make a film like The Day Trippers. It really is. You know, people with an iMac Pro can edit it. You can shoot it on a video camera. It's much, much simpler and easier to make a film and to get it out there. I think that's really exciting. The challenge, and via the internet, you can get it out there. The challenge, of course, is the marketing dollars and how you make people aware of your film. But I'm a believer in, you know, look at how things grow exponentially. Harry Potter, the book, it was a word-of-mouth book. It wasn't something that achieved, especially the first book and the second book, didn't achieve great success through marketing dollars. The first printing of the first Harry Potter, I think was in the UK, was 2,500 copies. It was a word-of-mouth phenomenon. And that is really exciting, and I have to believe that that's possible with film too.
One more question, then we'll open it up to the audience. We spoke about self-consciousness before. You know, a person of great success, the Potter franchise, your previous films, your next step in many ways is crucial. And it's a personal question, maybe you don't have the answer to it, but does that step belong to you? Or do you feel an obligation to where you've been to advance that? And where does a man like you go next? And maybe the answer is I don't know.
Well, what I'm not looking for is the next Harry Potter, because there isn't a next Harry Potter, unless Joe Light's not Harry Potter. But there isn't a next Harry Potter. You know, I think we talked a little bit about this, is I think one of the dangers in the film industry is the sort of self-referential approach to film. People want the next this or the next that, because it offers a security and a comfort. This has been done before, it will work again. But the fact is the copies of the originals are never as good as the originals. And it's a diminishing, you know, law of returns. For myself, I think I'm open to what comes next. I don't have a program or a plan. I'm trying to figure it out. I think for myself there's a couple of possibilities. I could raise money and be in control of the films I make. And really one of the greatest pleasures I have had is working with great writers and great directors. And at the moment I'm working with a director called Alfonso Cuarón, who made a film called Y tu mamá también, and the third Harry Potter. And I've worked with David Yates on the last 4 Harry Potters, and Mike Newell. It's in Greg Matola. It's really, it's some of the most exciting times of my life, working with these great directors who challenge me and who I can be in a position to help them and to support them in realizing their vision. So I don't know yet. I'm open to what comes. But I'm really excited about the next step.
Okay. They open up to the audience for questions. Yeah.
I'm just curious about your thought about this medium. You basically developed online. You developed a service for online enhanced ebook production, and we found ourselves approached by repackaging films. Yeah, we didn't expect that, but it's a different kind of medium, if you will. Any thoughts about?
When you say repackaging films, what do you mean?
Well, actually, as you say, Jo has already announced she's going to reproduce the book and the films with regard to enhanced ebook extraction, hence repackaging. But we're seeing, by providing services that expedite the process of enhanced ebooks, a lot of documentary film producers and so on approaching us. And it was an interesting phenomenon.
Well, I think that on the one hand it's an interesting sort of dichotomy between the demand for the increased power of the multinational corporation who have the outreach to get your thing out there, and the individual taking control of the technology and the means of fabrication and distribution. And you know, I read an article recently I can't remember where it was, but it was about, you know, in the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, it was about mass production, and now they were talking about these 3D copiers, where you put in a blueprint and you get this plastic model of an architectural model or a shoe or whatever it is, and the notion that it's going to allow, or for example, these are being used in Africa, where people lose a screw and it doesn't work, they'll be sent the blueprint and they can make their own plastic screw. And this idea of taking control is a very real one, and I think a very necessary one. I think we have to do that, because most certainly the nature of corporate cinema that is defined purely by the economic, and I understand why, you know, I think it is a marriage of the two, but where fear is a primary motivation, it's a very hard one it's not one that really encourages creativity, and I think that's why people are and will sort of seize control the technology and work with people like yourself.
Yeah, my simple point was that it was a different way to tell a story.
Oh, there are so many. I mean, video games, is an interesting one for me. For a video game, there's 40. When we were beginning with the Harry Potter games, they were doing 40 to 60 hours of story online. There are so many different ways of telling a story, and the notion, the film, I think will always be there, because I think there is something wonderful about sort of the passive engagement, though hopefully with the film it's not entirely passive. I don't want a passive engagement with film. But where you can actively be involved in multiple ways is very, very exciting. We're here.
From what you've told us until now, you've been involved in a way as a creative producer in Harry Potter. I was wondering to what extent you were involved in the marketing strategy of the film afterwards.
I'm not an expert in knowing. I didn't most certainly at the beginning. I know a lot more now, but know the value of a TV spot on Sky. That's not where my expert. But I am very involved in defining the message and defining what elements are put out to define that image, whether it be a trailer or images of the actors or photos or so in that sense I'm very involved, but I'm not someone who knows enough about buying TV spots or where a billboard is best placed. I only know that from personal, if I'm walking in London and I don't see a poster for a while, I'll most certainly make a phone call and ask why. But beyond this, I have no expertise in the practical aspect of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think about we were talking before about this self-fulfilling prophecy of monetizing. I like the way you said corporate cinema and the fear that's driving the idea of sort of restamping old ideas. At the end of the day, cinema, the filmmaking experience is about emotional connection to character and actors portraying those characters. And it's not really a question, just really a thought that this notion that it's dying or it's dead, but at the end of the day, in many ways, it's a very exciting time. We talk about the individuals making film. At the end of the day, what matters is story, character, not spectacle, necessarily.
I think spectacle still does matter. I think people want spectacle, or certain people want spectacle. But the films, I can only speak for what I enjoy. And I enjoy stories that have great characters. I'm not drawn to stories necessarily that, as I say, back into it, because if we say, when you make a film that's like another film, then you're going to make a film that's like that film, that's like another film. Then you're going to make a film that's like that film, that's like that film, that's like that film. You become further and further removed from the soul and heart of what makes a story. And I think the audience knows. Sometimes they may not care, but I think for the most part they do. And most certainly those films that I believe will last beyond the time that they're released, that will have a life that will go beyond the 8 weeks of release. Those are films that are about people and not about machines, and are about connection.
In the back?
Yeah, I projected. Thank you. Maybe it's a slightly offbeat question, but it's one that sort of occurs to me. I've worked as a writer for a few years now, and I know that one of the things that happens to me sometimes is if someone asks me, I'm reading a book about, what am I reading? If it's a book that's not kind of cool or up there, if I'm reading Harry Potter, for example, sometimes, you'll get the occasional sort of look. So I wonder, do you have guilty story pleasures? Do you have stories that you would kind of rather, that you love, that you'd rather people didn't know about, or do you think that in reality they don't really exist?
Well, there are certainly certain things I read that I might not talk about in this room.
That kind of stuff.
But I'm sorry, I don't mean, what would...
What I mean is there are certain, I think, I would say that I have certain guilty story pleasures in terms of books that I have to admit that if someone saw it on my coffee table, I wouldn't be sort of, you know, the ego in me wouldn't be particularly pleased for them to be aware of it. And I wonder if we all do, and I wondered if you have a guilty story. Like I watched Avatar, the whole cartoon series last year, and I really enjoyed it. But I would say that it's not cool to do that, or am I completely and utterly wrong to think there's a hierarchy of that kind of nature? We should be proud of all stories. If they work.
I think it's cool to whom. I think it's about having the confidence to. It doesn't. I think it's not about responding to what anybody else is telling you you should like or shouldn't. It's about finding things that you do. So I have very little guilt about what I enjoy reading. I like it, and it's okay if other people don't. There's plenty of things that there are films I'd like to make that I'm interested in that I know very few people will go and see, and I have no guilt about that whatsoever. It just means that I need to make films at a price point, being a practical producer, that makes that viable. And I may push it a little bit because I like to have more, I get a little more than maybe right, but you work within a framework, and actually the market dictates that in part. But I don't have there's no real guilty pleasures. I mean, I love, maybe the pleasure I have in reading children's books. I love reading children's books, and maybe, if I'm sitting on a tube and I'm reading books for 6-year-olds, partly because I've got a 3-year-old of my own that I'm reading things before he does, but partly because I love reading Hans Christian Andersen or Grimm's fairy tales or Tales of Hoffmann or Roald Dahl, Tales of the Unexpected. I love reading Julia Donaldson. So.
But I think in a sense that just to make my to underline that in a way, I think the fact that Harry Potter books, for example, came out with adult covers as well as children's covers underlines that point. But I think all your points actually are totally relevant.
Actually, the other relevance to that was the fact that the author was called J.K. Rowling and not Joanne Rowling, because boys don't read. Boys tend not to read. Young boys tend not to pick up books by women.
I didn't know that.
And so there was an anonymity about J.K. Rowling. That I think that was true. That was what I heard to be the case. But there is definitely a trend that boys do not like, or are not necessarily inclined to read, whereas girls are more inclined to read books by men, and most certainly boys are by women.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, right here.
I've got one question. My English is really bad, so I'm sorry.
Seems pretty good from here.
I've got, it's stupid, but I still ask it. In the last part of Harry Potter, in the last 20 minutes, there's this scene that takes place 20 years after all of Harry Potter takes place. And there's this one character who has been a big role in the whole film, and actually the book is Neville. And Neville has been cut out in this last scene where the whole scene is just built on him being the new headmaster of Hogwarts. It's not Ron, it's not Harry. And this was the thing that made me cry while reading the book, since he became a nerd and suddenly he's the headmaster. And even in the film, you put him up so big. He kills the monsters. It's not Ron, it's not Hermione, it's him. But he was left, why?
You're right. When we shot it, we actually shot that scene twice, because the first time we got it wrong. We got the makeup terribly wrong. Trying to make, it's one of the hardest things is to make young actors look old. So their skin is too bloody fresh. They're so clean and perfect, so it's really hard to, and the weight, and I hate to tell you, the skin goes grayer and duller, and it's not, we compensated, and we went too far, and poor Ron looked like he was around 75 years old and had been drinking much, much, much too beer. I don't know what Hermione had done to him. So we got it wrong, and we redid it. We got the makeup better, and we reworked the scene, and we shot Neville. But the problem was that within the scene itself, what we didn't want was endingitis. We didn't want the feeling of having too many steps to the end, and we didn't want to tick all the boxes. Yes, we're visiting this character. Yes, we're visiting that character. And so keeping the focus on the three of them, on Harry, Ron, and Hermione, was our way of avoiding that. And in a way, it is their story, was about resolving their story and giving the sense that life does continue. It's about new beginnings and the circular nature of life. Neville's story was in some ways resolved within the film when he stands up to Voldemort and ultimately when he kills the basilisk. I agree, him as headmaster is a wonderful thing, but within the film, the focus is on those three characters. In any adaptation, you have to make choices. One of the key things when we were doing Potter, one of the key changes was when Alfonso Cuarón came aboard on the third film. We shifted our approach to adaptation, and we started telling the story from Harry Potter's point of view. And that meant that there were some key things fell by the wayside. Things that I loved, Hermione's, spew, things that were really significant and emotionally engaging and important. But it provided us with a narrative structure. And that's something we held through into this last film, which was Harry, Ron, and Hermione, particularly Harry's story. And so giving Neville, already we gave Neville a lot, and one of the challenges in the last film was actually finding the balance for each character. You wanted to see all the characters, and you want to see Neville. How much do you give him without detracting from Harry, Ron, and Hermione? So ultimately in that final scene, Neville was shot, but alas, there was no room. And we most certainly didn't want to go to Hogwarts to see him again as headmaster, because that would have been another ending. Sorry, by the way.
You pissed me off with that.
I'm sorry.
So we won't see.
We pissed so many people off. I mean, the number of letters and emails, and actually, for the most part, and this may sound terrible, we didn't pay any attention, because if we did, we would have been paralyzed. Because the fact is everybody has their own point of view and their own sense of what is important. And for you, Neville clearly was an important part, and he was important to me. But if we did everything that everybody wanted, one would have ended up with 6-hour films, and they're already long enough.
David, did you feel any kind of, not saying just to add to this, any kind of mutual ownership, even accidental, even maybe nothing you'd want to admit, but as she's producing these novels, you're coming up right behind, you're going to know you're going to make the movie. Did you feel a kind of passive ownership of the series so that, as you're reading the new pages of the novels, you're wincing or you're hoping it goes one direction or the other? You want the novels to go one way and instead they go the other.
As a fan, the way we approached making the films, and every time I read a book, it was as a fan. I loved these books, I loved the characters. And as a producer, and as filmmakers, as the director and writer, and everybody involved approached as fans. And in a way, we were, just to carry on your point, you have to make choices, and we were fans making our choices. So we had to listen to the core group of people who were the fans, because if we went beyond, I don't think we'd have finished any one of the films, because clearly there were many, many voices, millions of voices out there who had their own point of view. But in terms of ownership, absolutely. I felt real ownership of these characters and these things, but never once did I wince, because Joe understood these characters better than anybody. Every once in a while, actually, Steve Clovis would write a scene that wasn't in the book, and that Joe loved. And every once in a while we wrote something and Joe would go, I'm not so sure about this. Actually, it happened twice, but once I'll talk about. On the 5th film, we cut out a character. And the process was Joe would read a draft, and she wasn't on set, but she would read a draft, and if there was anything that was amiss, she'd let us know. So on the 5th film, there was a character who would cut out because of this very thing about omitting that which was not relating to Harry. And the 7th book hadn't been published yet, and she said, I think you should put him back in because he's got a big role to play in the 7th book. I mean, if you don't want to, that's fine, but it's going to be tough for you. And that was Creature. So we cut him out in the script, but when she said that, we listened and we put him back in. But there were times where Steve Clovis would come up with things that Joe has acknowledged that she wished she had. One of which was something that was quite controversial in terms of the fans, which was in the 7th film, there's a scene where Harry and Hermione dance in a tent. And it's a scene where these two young characters, they're 17 years old, have been forced into a situation which demands of them an experience that goes far beyond their years. They've lost their youth in a way. And there's this moment where they dance and they recapture their youth, they let go, and at the end of it, you think there's a possibility that they, could be lovers, could become lovers. And there's a hint, and then they go their separate ways. And Steve wrote that without Joe, and it goes to the very heart of what Joe felt about Harry and Hermione, that yes, they could have gotten together. In many ways, they'd have been great together, but it didn't happen. So it goes both ways.
And her reaction to that was?
She loved it. She got on very, very, very well with Steve Clovis. I think he was the first person hired, and I think Joe went to Los Angeles to meet him. And I think it was the most nervous she's been in the entire process, because this is the person who was going to adapt her book, and it is really the most... You can make a bad film out of a good script, but you can't make a good film out of a bad one. And he was sort of key, and she met him and she found a kindred spirit. And I know that when she was writing the 4th book, he was writing the 1st script. I think the 4th book was the first time she had a really clear deadline, and I think she was under immense pressure, I know. And Steve was, this book which hadn't been published, or had just been published, was all of a sudden on the cover of Time magazine and was number 1, 2, and 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. So these two people experiencing this incredible pressure really bonded. And Jo she really understands that film and books are different media. She just wants to watch. And if you notice, Harry Potter, there's never you never see books with photographs of the film on the cover. Most films, you see that. It was very intentional to keep the two separate. And so as a collaborator, Jo was incredibly generous in allowing us and appreciating that the films were different beasts to the books.
Maybe one more question, right here.
You said you love reading books. What do you think about original scripts? Is it just your personal passion that you start with books, or is it a requirement of the market?
No, I love original scripts. There are very few written, most certainly in the UK. In Los Angeles, I think there are a lot more. And I love original scripts. I actually find that often, the experience I've had is often the characters in books are so rich and provide great fodder for screenwriters. But I'm working right now with Alfonso Cuarón on his new film, and it was something that he wrote with his son, and it's rich, emotive, exciting, evocative film, and it comes from an original screenplay. So no, I'm absolutely not averse to it. And but books. Well, actually, when I came back to London, it was a way of distinguishing myself. And given that I hadn't worked in London, it was a way that I could find material. And again, the Brits don't really write original screenplays, because unlike in Hollywood, where if you write an original screenplay and it gets, you get lots of money. In the UK, that's not part of it, and not an option. So people are writing, often the BBC or Channel 4 or producers will pay, and there's very little original, unless it's been paid for. But yes, gosh, an original screenplay, please.
David, thank you very much. Thanks for years of pleasure and good luck. Postmodern.
Thank you very much. Thanks for making this easy. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to thank also you, all the speakers, everyone who was attending Story Drive 2011. Well, I hope you enjoyed your time here, and I'll see you next year. Now it's time to have a last drink together, so please get outside and have a drink with us. See you next year. Thank you.